The cowboy's silent rescue. She never forgot his hands. 20 years had passed, but Aiyana could still feel the warmth of those calloused fingers against her wrist. Even now, as she stood in the dusty main street of Copper Creek, her heart quickened at the memory of hands that had saved her life without saying a single word. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the weathered buildings of the frontier town. Aiyana adjusted the beaded choker around her neck, the turquoise stones catching the golden light. Her leather boots stirred small clouds of dust as she walked, the fringe on her buckskin dress swaying with each step. The feathers woven into her long black hair rustled softly in the desert breeze. She had returned to this place for one reason: to find the man who had rescued her all those years ago, the man whose face she had never clearly seen, but whose gentle touch had branded itself into her memory forever. Aiyana was 7 years old when it happened. Her family's wagon had broken down in the harsh desert outside Copper Creek. The wheel had snapped clean in two, leaving them stranded under the merciless sun. Her father had gone to find help, leaving Aiyana with her mother and baby brother beneath the meager shade of their canvas cover. Hours passed. The water ran low. Her mother grew weak, clutching the crying infant to her chest. Aiyana had wandered away from the wagon, drawn by what she thought was the sound of a stream. Instead, she found herself lost among the tall sagebrush and scattered rocks, the desert stretching endlessly in all directions. Night fell like a heavy blanket. The temperature dropped quickly, and Aiyana shivered in her thin cotton dress. She called out for her mother, her voice echoing off the distant mesas, but only silence answered back. Fear crept into her small chest as the coyotes began their evening songs. That's when she saw the horse, a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. The animal moved with quiet grace through the desert scrub. Its rider sat tall in the saddle, a rifle resting across his lap. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features, and a long coat that fluttered in the night wind. Aiyana pressed herself against a boulder, afraid to move, but the horse stopped, and the rider dismounted. His boots crunched softly on the desert floor as he approached a hiding place. She expected rough words, maybe anger at finding an Indian child so far from any settlement. Instead, the man knelt down slowly, keeping his movements gentle and In the moonlight, she could see only the lower half of his face, a strong jaw covered with several days' worth of stubble. He didn't speak. Instead, he held out his hand, palm up, waiting. Aiyana stared at that hand. It was large and weathered, with calluses from years of hard work. There were small scars across the knuckles, and dirt under the fingernails. But something in the way he offered it, patient and kind, made her trust him. She placed her small hand in his fingers closed gently around hers, and he helped her to her feet. Still without a word, he lifted her onto his horse and swung up behind her. The animal moved at a careful walk, picking its way through the darkness with sure steps. Aiyana leaned back against the stranger's chest, feeling safe for the first time in hours. His heartbeat was steady and calm, and his arms formed a protective circle around her as he held the reins. The leather of his coat was soft against her cheek, and she caught the faint scent of sage and wood smoke. They rode for what felt like hours. The stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out its lonely song. Aiyana dozed fitfully, waking each time the horse changed pace or direction. Finally, she saw lights ahead. Her family's wagon came into view, surrounded by several men with lanterns. Her father was there, along with other members of their traveling party. They had been searching for her. The cowboy reined in his horse at the edge of the camp. Gently, he lifted Aiyana down and set her on the ground. She turned to look up at him, wanting to see his face, wanting to thank him, but the brim of his hat still cast deep shadows, and the flickering lamplight revealed only glimpses: a straight nose, kind eyes that seemed to smile even though she couldn't see his mouth. He touched the brim of his hat in a small salute, then turned his horse and rode back into the darkness. Who was that? Aiyana had asked her father. Don't rightly know, her father replied, pulling her into his arms. But we owe him a debt we can never repay. Now, 20 years later, Aiyana walked the streets of Copper Creek, hoping against hope that the mysterious cowboy still lived in this area. She had asked around town, but her descriptions were too vague. A tall man with a wide-brimmed hat could be any of 100 cowboys who passed through these parts. The sun was beginning to set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and pink. Aiyana made her way to the edge of town, where a small cemetery sat on a low hill. She had heard that many of the old-timers were buried there, and perhaps the caretaker might know something. The cemetery was quiet, except for the sound of wind through the desert grass. Weathered headstones marked the graves of pioneers, cowboys, and dreamers who had made this harsh land their final home. Aiyana walked slowly among them, reading the names and dates. That's when she heard it, the soft crunch of boots on gravel. She turned and saw a man walking toward her between the graves. He was older now, his hair silver beneath a familiar wide-brimmed hat. His face was weathered by decades of sun and wind, but his steps were still sure and steady. Aiyana's breath caught in her throat. She knew those hands, even before she saw them clearly. They were larger now, more scarred, but unmistakably the same hands that had reached out to her in the darkness all those years ago. The man stopped a few feet away from her. He studied her face in the fading light, and slowly recognition dawned in his eyes. "You're the little girl from the desert," he said quietly. His voice was deep and gentle, with a hint of gravel from years of trail dust and campfire smoke. "You remember me?" Aiyana whispered. He smiled, and the expression transformed his weathered features. "I never forgot. How could I? You were so brave that night, trusting a stranger in the dark. I never forgot your hands," she said, surprising herself with her honesty. "I've thought about them every day for 20 years. They were so gentle, so kind. I never even learned your name." "Thorn," he said simply. "Thorn McKenna. I came back to find you, to thank you." Thorn shook his head. "No thanks needed. Any decent man would have done the same, but you didn't just help me," Aiyana said, stepping closer. "You saved my life, and you did it without expecting anything in return. You didn't even wait for a thank you." "That's not the cowboy way," Thorn said with a slight smile. "We help folks when they need helping, then we ride on." "But I needed to find you," Aiyana said. "I needed to tell you that what you did mattered, that it changed my life." Thorn was quiet for a long moment, his eyes studying her face. "You grew up beautiful," he said finally, "and strong. I can see it in the way you carry yourself." Aiyana felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Will you have dinner with me?" she asked. "I'm staying at the hotel in town for a few days. I'd like to hear about your life, about what you've been doing all these years." Thorn hesitated, and for a moment Aiyana feared he would refuse. Then he nodded slowly. "I'd like that," he said. "It's been a long time since I had dinner with someone as pretty as you." As they walked back toward town together, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Aiyana felt a sense of completion that she had been seeking for 20 years. She had found her silent guardian, and he was even better than she had remembered. "There's one thing I always wondered," she said as they reached the main street. "What's that? Why didn't you speak to me that night? Why didn't you tell me your name, or ask about my family?" Thorn was quiet for several steps. "Because sometimes," he said finally, "words aren't necessary. Sometimes the most important things happen in silence. And sometimes, a scared little girl just needs to know she's safe, without having to explain or answer questions." Aiyana smiled, understanding flooding through her. He had given her exactly what she needed that night, not words or explanations, but simply the quiet assurance that she was no longer alone. That as they walked toward the hotel together, Aiyana realized that her long journey back to Copper Creek had been worth every mile. She had found more than just the man who had rescued her. She had found a kindred spirit, someone who understood that the most profound connections sometimes happen without words, and perhaps, if she was very lucky, this was not the end of their story, but the beginning of a new chapter written in the golden light of desert sunsets and the gentle touch of caring hands.